Welcome 111. This is week seven's lesson. We are getting very close to the end, and I'm only introducing one new concept this week because it is time to start wrapping up and consolidating what we've learned into a final essay. And that essay is Essay 3. So I want to, in this lesson, uh, introduce to you Essay 3 and the concept for the week. And then I'm just going to go over those two things. So it's going to be short. All right. So this is the instructions for Essay 3. And you probably already have reviewed them briefly. It's a 5-page interpretation of one of the texts in this list. And you'll see that these are the texts that you read and wrote about for your reading journal over the course of the last couple months. So you can choose any of these 5 texts, and so this is an opportunity for you to write more about one of the texts that you found interesting or that you liked. So that's what this essay is about. 5 pages sounds like a lot, but it's double spaced, and you will have more to write about than you think you do once you start writing. So don't worry about meeting the length, just dive right in, and I think you will be surprised at how much you have to say. Um, I use this phrase, top-down organizational structure. Employ a top-down organizational structure, including a thesis statement in the first paragraph. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit in this video about what I mean by that. And the rest of the essay is pretty straightforward. You're just going to use all the close reading strategies, observing and interpreting that we've been doing in this course. You're just going to use those tools to do a very close reading and analysis of the text you chose, and then to form an interpretive conclusion about this text. What does it mean? That's what you're going for. I wrote a bunch of tips on this page so that you have lots of things to read that will help you. Let me just highlight one or two of them. First, I say here, don't research. This is not a research paper. In fact, it's explicitly a non-research-based paper. You're relying, as we've done this entire course, we're relying on only your own analytical abilities, your ability to observe and try to make interpretations or speculate about those observations. That's been the whole premise of this course, so we continue with that here. And I say don't research because if you feel stuck, what does this text mean that I've picked? So I don't understand this part of the text. You'll be tempted to look it up. Is there an answer out there on the internet, or somebody has thought of this? The problem with that is as soon as you do that, you'll be in a dead end situation. You won't be able to use that person's idea because you can't cite it in this non-research based paper. But nor can you have that idea yourself because it's not your idea, it's somebody else's. So it's much better not to even go to the internet or to look up any information about the text. Just try to do it on your own. Just do it on your own. Don't research anything. All your ideas will therefore be your own, and that you'll have a better time if you do it that way. Okay. All these tips I think are important to read, but I don't want to waste. I don't want to make this a really long video, so I'm going to go quickly. But notice, organize your essay around your observations. All right, and here's what that looks like. Just like previous essays, where we started with a summary of the text, and then you observe, and then you generalize those observations into an interpretive conclusion. You're doing that same thing here. The only difference in this essay is that you have something more like a formal thesis statement, and you have more observations probably because it's a slightly longer, more comprehensive analysis of the text. But the same structure is in place. You're going to start by giving an overview, observing, and then interpreting. Okay? And last but not least, how are you going to come up with so much to write about? Well, there is actually so many things you can do with style analysis and rhetoric analysis and logical analysis that I don't think you'll have a hard time filling out your 5 pages. Below the Essay 3 instructions, I've included a handy guide for close reading, and it gives you lots of questions to ask about the language that's being used, about how the narrative is structured, and these will help you keep your self going with plenty of material. Okay, that's Essay 3. Now, I want to talk about what Weston was discussing. Weston has this Rule 34 called Jump Right In. And I want to bring this to your attention because jumping right in is a key to academic writing and to all writing. To journalistic writing, for instance, you read a newspaper article, you know right away what it's going to be about. You feel like the journalist jumps right in. Well, something that people don't quite get at first that I'm trying to give you a shortcut and get you to see quicker as a college student than most college students is that we do the same thing in academic writing. And this applies also to business writing and to any kind of formal writing at all. We jump right in, which is to say we don't hold anything back. We don't build up toward our points. We do that in the body of our text, but at the very beginning of the text, we jump right in and say what it is we're trying to say. In academic papers, we call that the thesis statement. But the same rule applies to all these different things. What's your main point? What are you trying to say? Just say that. And so that's what Weston is getting at here. And this is going to be a key concept too when you write your academic papers. It's the same thing as a kind of like a summary. Now I'm going to show you. I asked you to do a very short piece of exercise, thesis statement exercise, and that thesis. Actually, I have that here. Let me go back to the practice set for the week. For this week, I asked you to do just a very short practice set on thesis statements. And it follows right in line with Weston's Rule 34, jump right in. So the practice set asks you to read these little chunks, these little summaries of arguments, and write 1 to 3 sentences that you could use to begin the essay. How would you start this essay if you were writing an essay making this argument? That is what you're going to write. And I say one of the sentences should begin with, in this essay I will argue that. Right? This phrase is called a lead-in phrase or a prompting phrase. It is absolutely acceptable for me to put that right into your essay 3. When you write essay 3, you can put, in this essay I will argue that, right in your essay. I'm not bothered by that. Perhaps professional editors would find that to be a little corny, but as a student phase, at your student phase of development, this is a very useful and acceptable phrase to put right into your writing. Why? Because it clearly identifies for your reader where your thesis is. It's a nice label, and more importantly, it helps you to generate the sentence or the idea that answers. This is like a question you're asking yourself. Well, what is it I'm answering and arguing in this essay? When you finish writing the sentence, you know the answer to that question. Whatever comes here is your thesis statement. So it helps you generate your thesis statement, in other words. Okay? So in this practice set, we're just coming up, I'm just snapping out some of these problems from Weston, or these example mini arguments from Weston's workbook, and asking you to write, basically imagine a sentence or two at the beginning of each of these paragraphs. One of them starting with, in this essay I will argue that. And based on what you're reading here, what would you fill that in with? So what I'm showing you here, I'm showing you this to show you what to do for the practice set, but also to show you that this is really saying, summarize this. What is the bottom line or main point of this? Take that main point, put it at the beginning, put this phrase in front of it, and you have yourself a thesis statement. So a thesis statement is simply a summary of the main point of your argument. That's all a thesis statement is. It should go at the beginning. It can often be nicely labeled or easily identified like this, but it is essentially just the one sentence or concise version of your argument or your main point. Okay, so summaries, thesis statements are like summaries that go at the beginning of things. Okay, now there's another. Now that this is part of a larger pattern that we see in academic writing and informal writing. It is what I call the top-down organizational structure of academic or formal writing. Top-down organization. If you think about the way an essay is organized, as WikiHow's graphic shows us here, you realize that it has a kind of top-down hierarchy or organization. Where do we put the thesis statement that summarizes the argument? Well, we always put it at the beginning of an essay. So if you think about an essay, it begins with a clear labeling of what the essay is about, followed by, in the rest of the essay, or the body of the essay, the detailed explication of that main argument. So the concise version, the bottom line main point goes to the top. Everything that unfolds that main point goes below it. So that's a top-down organization. We get the whole thing first, and then we get the whole thing in slower, more detailed form. So a whole essay is organized as a top-down organizational structure. Thesis, explanation. But now think about a paragraph. Each paragraph in an essay, you just ignore these labels here. That's not really what I'm talking about. I liked how these became red, because it shows you that within, the whole essay this is like the red line, and these are like the blue lines, right? Red at the top, blue below. But then think about each paragraph. Each paragraph is the same thing in miniature form. At the beginning of a paragraph, you're going to tell your reader what the paragraph's about. It's called a topic sentence. What's the bottom line of this paragraph? The paradox is, or the irony is, it's not the bottom line, it's the top line. In academic writing, you can think about it that way. We take the bottom line and we put it at the top. So each paragraph begins with a topic sentence, followed by the explanation or the longer, fuller version of what you said at that first sentence. So again, in each paragraph, we see the same principle followed. We see a top-down organization, the entire thing, the whole thing in a concise form, followed by the whole thing in the full form. All right, so that top, red at the top, blue below, that follows both at the macro level of the essay and the micro level of the essay. All right, now if you can get that, if you can understand that concept, then you have everything you need to be successful, in my opinion, as a college writer. Or at least you are 90% of the way there. It's all in the details after that. If you can get that, then you're well on your way. Now, what this means, think about what this means. This means that topic sentences are kind of like the same thing as thesis statements. A thesis statement is just a topic sentence for the entire essay. All right, so think about topic sentences and thesis statements as the same thing, or a family resemblance, and think about topic sentences and thesis statements as also having a family resemblance to summarizing, to summary. When you take a whole thing and you summarize it, what is the basic summary of it? Okay, so those are my main highlights for this lesson. Jump right in. Follow the top-down organizational structure that we like in academic writing, and notice that thesis statements and topic sentences are the same thing, just at different levels of the essay. All right, I want to look at an example of that. I wrote you an example of essay 3, and so I'll just show you those things happening in my example. It's not a full example. I skipped a few paragraphs here because I didn't want to write the entire thing. But I took, actually what I did was I took the example essay from essay 1 and I converted it to essay 3 type of structure to use as an example. And by the way, essay 1 and essay 3, when I was doing this, I realized essay 1 and essay 3 are not completely different types of essays. They're very similar, and that's intentional. You're getting to practice the same kind of writing multiple times in this course because by reiterating, by redoing the same things, you get better at them. And after you've done it a couple of times, you start to see more and more what it is you're going for and how to do it on the second and the third and the fourth try. So this final third essay is a slightly more elaborate version of what you've been doing the whole time. Okay. Now in this version, there is a more formal thesis statement, right? And here I use the gimmicky phrase that I would actually like you to use, or I encourage you to use in this essay. I will argue that, and I wrote a thesis-like statement. Maybe these 2 sentences are my thesis for this example essay. So let's look at what I have here. I began as the essay 3 instructions suggest. I began with a summary followed by a thesis statement, and those 2 things form my first paragraph. I have a very basic summary of the text I'm going to look at, and then I have a thesis statement. Okay, so that's all I'm doing in my first paragraph. This is where thesis statements live in academic writing. They typically live at the end of the first paragraph. Okay, so once I've done that, then I begin observation paragraphs. And like we said, observation paragraphs following the top-down structure begin with very succinct summaries or topic sentences that tell us what the paragraph is arguing or what the observation is. All you have to say is one sentence, concise version of what your observation is in each paragraph at the beginning of them. Here is my observation, and then I get to have, as long as I want, really, paragraphs can be pretty long, to explain how I got to that observation. So it's a top-down structure. I put the bottom line at the top. Okay? If you follow that, I'm going to continue with that process, observations and so on. And then at the very end, I condense them all into my overall conclusion, my interpretive conclusion, which should match this, right? I said up here in my thesis statement, this is what I'm going to argue. So by the time I get to the bottom, after I've added up all of my observations, I should be able to piece them together like a puzzle to say that. Right? So that is kind of a very basic macro look at what this essay is doing. Okay, so that's enough, I think, for now. You've got to draft essay 3 this week, and this will be an instructor's draft. So you want to put a lot of effort into it, and next week we will have a generous amount of time, the whole last week, to edit it. I'll give you feedback. You can revise it. You'll probably have to revise it, and then you will work on editing and formatting it in proper generic formatting according to conventions of academic formatting, and we'll talk about those details next week. But this week, write the essay. That's the bulk of the work, is to pick the text you want to write about, write the essay, use the reading guide to come up with lots of ideas for making observations in the text, and then just start drafting, right? You want to get it as close to a full draft as possible, and to look like it's following the structure as much as possible, because that will give me the ability to give you the best feedback possible for your revised version. Okay, send me email questions. Good luck and happy writing.